Hello guys. Welcome to Pika Fiction. So in this video, we will see what if Ash was a powerful ghost trainer. If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The specter of Pallet. The fog over Pallet Town was not a creature of meteorology. It did not obey the sun, nor did it answer to the wind that swept down from the Indigo Plateau. It was a shroud of ancient, weary energy, a permanent resident of the town's periphery where the living gave way to the dead. Here, nestled between Route 1 and the sea, lay the old Viridian Necropolis, a place far older than the cheerful, primary-colored homes of the town it bordered. The fog clung to the necropolis like a second skin, muting the greens of the moss-eaten angels and blurring the sharp, sorrowful edges of granite headstones into soft, gray thumbprints against the perpetual twilight. It was a place that smelled of damp, turned earth, of rain that had fallen a century ago and never quite evaporated, and of a faint, cloying sweetness like withered funeral wreaths. For the past week, this oppressive quiet had been shattered. A raw, violent grief, sharp and jagged as broken glass, had torn through the spectral serenity. It screamed in a frequency that rattled windows a mile away and made the fillings in teeth ache with sympathetic vibration. It was a sound that most people heard only as a disquieting hum on the edge of hearing, a primal dread that sent them scurrying indoors, bolting their doors against a threat they could not name. They saw only the aftermath. Gouges torn in the ancient cobblestone paths, iron fences twisted into agonized shapes, and the heavy stone lid of the Blackwood Mausoleum thrown 100 feet and embedded in the side of a decrepit oak. This was the work of a Gengar, but not just any Gengar. This was a spirit in agony, a psychic wound made manifest, lashing out at the world that had caused its pain. Its purple, spectral form, usually defined by a mischievous, malevolent grin, was now a vortex of chaotic shadow and incandescent rage. Its eyes burned not with cunning, but with the white-hot fire of pure, undiluted madness. It flickered in and out of the material plane, its phasing less a tactic and more a seizure, a frantic attempt to escape its own spectral flesh. At the epicenter of the chaos, standing just inside the twisted remains of the cemetery's main gate, was a young man who seemed as much a part of the landscape as the ancient yew trees. He was 17, tall and lean, with a frame built for swift, deliberate movement. He wore no bright blues or reds, no jaunty cap proclaiming a league affiliation. His attire was practical and subdued, dark gray cargo pants, worn leather boots, and a form-fitting black jacket that seemed to drink the meager light. His face, framed by unruly raven hair that the mist beaded with silver, was calm, his expression one of intense, focused concentration. The only color on him was the deep, resonant amber of his eyes, which at the moment were not looking at the physical world, but through it. This was Ash Ketchum, and what he saw was not a monster, he saw a symphony of torment. To his sight, the Gengar was a maelstrom of violent energy. Jagged shards of crimson pain radiated from its core, pulsing in time with its tortured shrieks. A sickly yellow aura of fear clung to it, thick and acrid. Beneath it all, a deep, abyssal blue of sorrow swirled sluggishly, the root of the entire affliction. Ash could feel it all as if it were his own. A dull throb behind his temples, the bitter taste of terror on his tongue, the crushing weight of loss settling in his chest. This was the burden and the gift of his bloodline, the legacy of the Aura Guardians of the Veil. He did not merely see the spirits. He perceived their very essence. Floating silently at his right shoulder was his own Gengar, a creature of a different caliber. This one was sleek, its corporeal form dense and well-defined, its grin a sharp, knowing crescent that promised intricate doom rather than mindless destruction. Its eyes were intelligent, ancient rubies that mirrored the quiet confidence of its trainer. It made no sound, its presence a cool spot in the humid air, a perfect anchor of controlled shadow energy. On his left, hovering with a gravitas that belied its simple, spherical form, was a Ghastly. But this was no common spirit. Its gaseous body was a swirling nebula of deep indigo and violet, and within its core, a single, luminous point of silver light pulsed like a patient heart. This was Haunter Prime, the ancestral spirit of the Ketchum line, a being that had served his family for generations, its wisdom as vast and deep as the abyss between stars. "The pain is old," Ash murmured, his voice a low vibration that was felt more than heard. "It's not from a recent wound. Something here woke it up." The wild Gengar shrieked again, and a wave of pure psychic force erupted from it. The world warped, the headstones seeming to bend and melt like wax. For a normal person, the sensory overload would have been crippling. For Ash, it was like listening to a garbled, frantic story. He braced himself, not physically, but spiritually, his own aura flaring to life around him. It was not a brilliant blue light, the kind spoken of in heroic legends. It was a soft, ashen gray luminescence, the color of twilight and embers, a calming, absorbent energy that met the psychic wave not with force, but with an unyielding empathy. The wave washed over him and dissipated, finding no purchase, no fear to amplify. The rampaging Gengar faltered, its assault meeting no resistance. It blinked its burning eyes, a flicker of confusion piercing through its rage. It was like punching water. Less than stay here, shade, greater than Ash projected, the thought a seamless current of intent flowing to his own Gengar. Less than create a perimeter. Nothing gets in, and more importantly, he doesn't get out until this is done. Greater than. Shade offered a slow, deliberate nod, its grin widening. It sank into its own shadow, which then stretched and elongated unnaturally, flowing like ink across the ground. The shadow spread, silent and swift, forming a perfect circle 100 yards in diameter around the distressed Gengar. From the edges of this circle, dozens of spectral, grinning eyes opened, all fixed on the spirit within. It was not a cage of force, but a cage of perception, a psychological prison built from the very element the Gengar commanded. Less than prime, greater than Ash's thought was a touch more reverent. Less than help me find the source. The memory that's driving this. Greater than. The silver light in the Ghastly's core pulsed once, brightly. It drifted forward, its form becoming more diffuse, its gaseous body a lens through which Ash could better focus his own perception. The world dissolved further into a tapestry of energy signatures. The living trees had faint, gentle green auras. The ancient stones held the deep, sleeping gray of memory. And the Gengar, its aura was a tangled, knotted mess. Ash and Prime moved forward together, stepping into the maelstrom. The enraged spirit roared at their approach, coalescing a massive ball of shadow energy between its hands. The shadow ball was unstable, crackling with raw, uncontrolled power. It hurled the orb, not with any particular aim, but as a general act of defiance. Ash didn't flinch. He simply raised a hand, palm open. "It's all right," he said, his voice calm and steady, projecting reassurance into the very air. "We're not here to hurt you." The shadow ball hit his outstretched hand and didn't explode. Instead, the swirling dark energy seemed to meet a quiet, unmovable shore. Ash's gray aura enveloped it, not neutralizing it, but absorbing it, drawing the chaotic energy into himself. He winced, his jaw tightening as the raw, negative emotion behind the attack washed through him. A flash of betrayal, a searing image of a broken Pokeball. He processed it, filtered it, and released it as a harmless sigh, the energy dissipating into the fog. This act of impossible non-violence stunned the wild Gengar into stillness. It had thrown its rage at this human, and the human had simply accepted it. It lowered its hands, its burning eyes wide with a dawning, terrified curiosity. Ash took another slow step forward, his amber eyes locked with the Gengar's. Prime floated beside him, its presence a gentle pressure against the raging storm of the other spirit's psyche. "That memory hurts," Ash said softly, his words resonating on the spiritual plane. "The one who left you. They didn't understand. They were afraid." He was sifting through the chaotic energy now, his consciousness, guided by Prime, delving into the Gengar's tormented mind. He saw flashes, fragments of a life lived a century ago. A young boy, a cherished friend. They had played in this very cemetery. The boy had grown into a man, and the Gengar, then a haunter, had been his constant companion. But the man had fallen in love with a woman who was terrified of ghosts. She saw the haunter not as a friend, but as a monster, an omen. She gave the man an ultimatum. Her, or the Pokémon. The Gengar shrieked as the memory surged, raw and fresh as if it happened yesterday. The image of its trainer, his face etched with shame and sorrow, placing its Pokeball on a small stone altar in the Blackwood Mausoleum. "I'm sorry," the man had whispered. "Wait for me. I'll come back for you. I promise." He never did. He grew old. He died. He was buried in a different town, miles away. The haunter waited. It waited for decades, its loneliness slowly curdling into resentment, its confusion into a cold, hard knot of betrayal. It evolved in the darkness of the mausoleum, its power growing with its despair. Recently, a group of teenage ghost hunters, emboldened by cheap holovids and cheaper courage, had broken into the tomb. They had desecrated the altar, smashing the old, forgotten Pokeball. The fragile vessel of a broken promise shattered, and 100 years of grief erupted into the world. He didn't forget you, Ash projected, his own aura gently wrapping around the Gengars, not to restrain, but to comfort. It was the spiritual equivalent of a gentle embrace. He was weak, he was afraid, but he never forgot. Ash reached into his own memories, pulling forward the feeling of his own connection with Shade and Prime. He projected the loyalty, the unwavering trust, the shared victories and quiet moments of companionship. He offered it to the Gengar, a stark contrast to the betrayal that had defined its existence. Less than this is what a bond is, greater than he sent, the thought a pure, warm wave of emotion. Less than it doesn't break. Not even after death, greater than. The Gengar trembled, its violent shudders slowly subsiding. The crimson aura of pain began to recede, the sickly yellow of fear thinning. The deep, abyssal blue of its sorrow was all that remained, no longer swirling with rage, but pulsing with a profound, quiet ache. Tears of black, viscous ectoplasm welled in its eyes and dripped down its spectral cheeks. It let out a low, mournful keen, a sound not of anger, but of a century of solitude finally being witnessed. Ash walked right up to the spirit, close enough to feel the cold radiating from its form. He slowly raised his hand again, not in a gesture of power, but of offering. "The waiting is over," he said. "You are free." The Gengar looked at his outstretched hand, then into his amber eyes. For the first time, it saw not a threat, not a human to be feared, but a kindred spirit. It saw a being who understood its language, the language of the soul. Hesitantly, it raised its own clawed hand and lightly touched Ash's fingertips. There was no physical substance to the touch, only a profound cold and a sudden, overwhelming transfer of 100 years of loneliness, grief, and finally, a sliver of peace. Ash accepted it all without flinching, his spirit a bastion against the tide of sorrow. And then, it was over. The Gengar's form solidified, the last of its rage dissipating into the fog. It looked at Ash, its eyes no longer burning, but glowing with a soft, weary light. It bowed its head, a gesture of profound gratitude and respect. Then, with a quiet sigh, it became incorporeal and sank into the damp earth, seeking a true, final rest among the sleeping dead it had terrorized. The oppressive silence of the necropolis returned, but this time it was a peaceful silence. The fog seemed to lighten, and a single, pale ray of moonlight pierced the gloom, illuminating the spot where the Gengar had vanished. Ash lowered his hand, his shoulders slumping slightly, filtering that much raw emotion was exhausting, like running a marathon in his soul. Shade solidified from the shadows beside him, its grin gone, replaced by a look of concern. It nudged its head against Ash's arm. Prime floated closer, the silver light in its core pulsing in a soft, soothing rhythm. "I'm all right," Ash assured them, offering Shade a faint smile and a scratch under its chin, a gesture it always seemed to appreciate. "Just tired. That was a lot of pain to hold onto for so long." A twig snapped behind him. Ash didn't startle, his senses had been aware of the approaching presence for the last 5 minutes. He had felt the familiar, gentle green aura, tinged with the light blue of academic curiosity and the deeper cobalt of worry. He turned, his calm expression a perfect mask for his fatigue. Professor Samuel Oak stood there, his lab coat looking strangely out of place amongst the tombstones. His usually jovial face was lined with a deep, uncharacteristic gravity. He held a small, advanced-looking scanner in his hand, though the device was clearly forgotten, his eyes fixed on Ash. "The PKE readings have normalized," the professor said, his voice quiet. "The spiritual turbulence is gone. I should be used to seeing you do this by now, Ash, but," he shook his head, a gesture of sheer wonder. "How you can face a century of pure rage and meet it with that. It's beyond anything my science can explain." "It's not science, Professor," Ash replied, walking toward him, his boots making soft sounds on the mossy path. "It's empathy. The Gengar wasn't a monster. It was a victim. It just needed someone to finally listen to its story." Professor Oak looked from Ash to the ancestral ghastly floating at his side. And I suppose having Haunter Prime as your spiritual amplifier helps. Prime's silver core gave a soft pulse of acknowledgement. He is a very good listener, Ash agreed. They stood in silence for a moment, the ancient quiet of the cemetery settling around them. It was a comfortable silence, born of a long and unusual history. Professor Oak had known about the Ketchum lineage since Ash's mother, Delia, had first come to him, desperate and afraid, when her young son had started seeing things that weren't there. Oak, a man of science, had nearly dismissed it until he'd witnessed the 4-year-old Ash calm a flock of terrified Spearows simply by humming a soft, soothing tune that resonated with their collective aura. From that day on, the professor had become the guardian of the family's secret, a trusted friend and mentor, guiding Ash in the physical world while Prime guided him in the spiritual one. This is the third major spectral event in Kanto this month, Ash, Oak said, his tone shifting, becoming more urgent. The ghastly migration in Lavender Town was a week early and unusually aggressive. The hypno wave in Hop 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 Town caused mass insomnia for 3 days. And now this. These aren't isolated incidents. They're symptoms. The veil is thinning. Ash's expression hardened, the weariness replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. The veil. The gossamer thin barrier between the material world and the spirit world, the realm of pure ghost energy. It was his family's ancient duty to protect it, a duty that had been all but forgotten by the world. I've been feeling it, Ash admitted, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, as if he could see the invisible energies churning there. It's like a constant, low-grade static in the back of my mind. A pressure building. Someone, or something, is pushing against it. I've been cross-referencing historical records with recent energy readings, Oak continued, his scientific mind clicking back into gear. He pulled a small datapad from his coat pocket, its screen glowing in the gloom. The energy signatures are unnatural. They have a strange resonance, a sort of technological echo superimposed on the spiritual frequency. It's like someone is trying to brute force a key into a lock that requires a delicate touch. Ash's eyes narrowed. Technology and spiritual energy don't mix well. Trying to force them together, it's like trying to mix matter and antimatter. The results are always explosive. He felt a sudden, sharp spike of cold dread, an involuntary shudder that had nothing to do with the cemetery's chill. A fragmented image flashed behind his eyes. A towering, ghostly silhouette, eyes like burning coals, wreathed in an aura of corrupted, violet energy that screamed of both ancient power and synthetic perversion. It was a recurring nightmare, a memory fragment from a past he couldn't fully grasp, a trauma that had defined the course of his young life. He pushed the image away, his control absolute. This was not the time for personal ghosts. The last time the veil was this unstable was during the last Great War, when Aura Guardians were common, Oak said, his voice laced with concern. But the line has dwindled. As far as I know, Ash, you're the last one with this particular affinity. The last of the Veil Guardians. The weight of that statement hung in the air, heavier than any tombstone. For a moment, Ash looked his age, a young man with a burden too great for one person to carry. But then he straightened his shoulders, the resolve returning to his amber eyes. Then I guess I have my work cut out for me, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Where is the epicenter of these disturbances? Where is the pressure the strongest? Oak swiped a finger across his datapad, bringing up a map of Kanto. Several points were blinking red, but one pulsed with a menacing, intense light. The energy seems to be coalescing around Saffron City. The psychic resonance there is amplifying the effect. I've been getting frantic reports from the Pokemon Center there for days. Unexplained equipment malfunctions, nightmares, a general sense of paranoia gripping the city. The gym leader, Sabrina, has sealed herself inside her gym. No one has seen her in a week. Sabrina, Ash said the name slowly. He knew of her. A psychic prodigy of immense power, a woman who had become so powerful she'd lost touch with her own humanity. Her psychic abilities were a raw, untamed force, deeply connected to the same energies he commanded with such precision. If anyone would feel the thinning of the veil like a knife to the soul, it would be her. If the energy there is being amplified, she's either in immense danger, or she could be a part of the problem, Ash reasoned, his strategic mind already piecing together the puzzle. I need to go to Saffron City. I agree, Oak said with a nod. This is beyond the capabilities of the League or any normal trainer. But be careful, Ash. Whatever is causing this is powerful, and they are not being subtle. They want to break through. And if you're the only thing standing in their way, then I'll be the one to stand, Ash finished simply. He looked at Shade, then at Prime. The unwavering loyalty in their presence was all the reinforcement he needed. He was not alone. He had never been alone. He was a Ketchum, and this was his duty, his purpose. Miles away, in the heart of the sleepless, paranoid metropolis of Saffron City, a young woman sat in the dead center of a dark, cavernous room. The only light came from the faint, geometric patterns glowing on the floor and the cold, blue light of a massive television screen. The room was a perfect sensory deprivation chamber, designed to shield her from the constant psychic screaming of the city. But lately, it wasn't enough. The whispers were getting through. Faint, ethereal voices from the other side, their words indistinct but their intent a palpable, terrifying pressure against the walls of her mind. On the screen, a local news anchor was reporting on the strange events in Pallet Town. Security footage, grainy and distorted, showed twisted metal and shattered stone in the old cemetery. The anchor spoke of atmospheric anomalies and unexplained seismic events. Then, for a brief moment, a clearer image filled the screen. It was a tourist's unauthorized drone footage, captured from a great distance. It showed a young man in black standing before a vortex of shadow and rage. It showed him raise a hand, and it showed the vortex simply dissolve into nothing. Sabrina leaned forward, her usually placid, doll-like face a mask of stunning intensity. Her silver eyes, which saw so much more than the physical world, narrowed. She couldn't read the young man's aura from this distance, not through a screen. But she could feel the echo of what had happened. She could feel the sudden, absolute pacification of a monumental spiritual disturbance. It was like hearing the echo of a thunderclap that had silenced a hurricane. It was not an act of power, like her own. Her power was a weapon, a shield, a tool to bend reality to her will. This was different. This was an act of communion, of understanding. He hadn't destroyed the ghost. He had accepted it. He had healed it. The whispers in her mind, the ones from beyond the veil, receded for a moment, silenced by the sheer resonance of that single, impossible act. For the first time in a week, Sabrina felt a moment of quiet in her own soul. And in that quiet, a new, singular thought bloomed, clear and sharp as a crystal shard. Who are you? Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2, The Silent City. Saffron City was a city of light and sound, a monument to human ambition carved from concrete, steel, and shimmering glass. Its arteries pulsed with the ceaseless flow of the magnet train, and its voice was a 24-hour chorus of commerce, traffic, and a million overlapping conversations. At least, that was the Saffron City that existed in postcards and tourist brochures. The city Ash Ketchum stepped into was a different beast entirely. He arrived at the central station, and the first thing that struck him was the silence. It wasn't peace. It was a vacuum, a smothering absence of noise where a cacophony should have been. The usual river of commuters was a hesitant trickle of solitary figures who walked with their shoulders hunched and their eyes fixed on the ground. They gave each other wide berths, as if casual contact might be a contagion. No one was talking. The only sounds were the soft scuffing of shoes on polished floors and the high-frequency hum of the station's massive electronic timetables, which flickered and spasmed, displaying gibberish as often as they did destinations. To Ash's heightened senses, the air itself was screaming. It was a thin, high-pitched whine at the very edge of perception, a dissonant chord of raw psychic energy clashing with the chaotic, desperate static of spiritual bleed-through. The two forces, never meant to mix so crudely, were grinding against each other, creating a friction that frayed the nerves and curdled the thoughts of everyone in the city. He could feel the collective paranoia like a physical pressure, a city holding its breath in anticipation of a blow that never landed. Shade, his Gengar, materialized beside him, its form a mere ripple in the air at first, then coalescing into its solid, grinning shape. It was a testament to its discipline that its trademark smile remained, but its ruby eyes were narrowed, scanning the oppressive atmosphere with distaste. Prime, the ancestral Ghastly, hovered on Ash's other side, its gaseous form tight and compressed, the silver light in its core a steady, unwavering point in the suffocating gloom. Less than this place is unwell, greater than Shade projected, its thought a dry, scraping sound in Ash's mind. Less than it feels like a massive, open wound. Greater than. It's an amplifier, Ash murmured, his amber eyes sweeping over the tense crowd. He saw a woman flinch away from her own reflection in a shop window. He saw a businessman drop his briefcase and stare at his hands as if he'd forgotten what they were for. Sabrina's power, the psychic energy of the entire populace, it's all acting like a giant satellite dish, pulling in the instability from the veil and broadcasting it back out. It's a feedback loop. He left the station and stepped out into the main thoroughfare. The scene was even more surreal. The towering skyscrapers, adorned with colossal neon advertisements, still blazed with color, but the light felt cold and predatory. The streets, usually choked with traffic, were unnervingly empty, save for a few automated delivery drones that zipped by with frantic, twitching movements. The silence was so profound that Ash could hear the buzz of a single street lamp half a block away. He didn't need a map. He could feel the source of the psychic broadcast like a lighthouse in a storm. He turned his steps toward the city center, his boots making quiet, rhythmic sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the dead air. He walked with a purpose that set him apart from the scurrying, fearful residents. He was not a victim of the city's malady, he was its physician. The Saffron City Gym was not the garish, welcoming structure of most league-certified facilities. It was a brutalist monolith of dark, unadorned concrete and smoked glass, a fortress designed to keep the world out. It radiated a palpable psychic pressure, a constant, crushing wave of pure mental force that made the air around it shimmer and distort. For a normal person, even approaching the building was a trial. Their heads would pound, their thoughts would scatter, and a primal instinct to flee would overwhelm them. Ash watched a uniformed officer Jenny try to approach the main doors, only to stop 30 feet away, her face pale and beaded with sweat, before turning and retreating with a shudder. Ash stopped at the edge of this invisible wall of force. He closed his eyes, extending his own aura, not to challenge the barrier, but to analyze it. It was a masterwork of psychic construction, a dome of pure will, seamless and absolute. It was designed to repel any mind, any emotion, any physical object that bore an intent to intrude. Forcing his way through would be like trying to punch through a mountain. But he wasn't going to force it. He opened his eyes and looked at the long, sharp shadow cast by the Sylph Company tower next door. The shadow fell across the street and terminated right at the base of the gym's wall. It was a river of darkness connecting the outside world to the one within. Less than shade, greater than Ash's thought was a simple, elegant command. Less than the shadow. Use it as a bridge. Don't break the lock. Simply open the door from the other side. Greater than. Shade's grin became a thing of true, artistic malice. It gave a deferential nod, then melted into the shadow at Ash's feet. The shadow rippled, and a tendril of deeper darkness flowed away from Ash, merging with the massive shadow of the skyscraper. It moved with the silent, inexorable purpose of spilled ink, completely undetectable. It flowed across the street, touched the gym wall, and then, with a flicker that was more conceptual than visible, it was gone. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hiss of pneumatics that echoed like a gunshot in the silence, the formidable main doors of the Saffron Gym slid open, revealing an abyss of perfect darkness within. Ash walked forward, crossing the psychic barrier without incident. As he passed the threshold where Officer Jenny had faltered, he felt the immense pressure of Sabrina's will wash over him. It was like stepping into the deep ocean. But his own aura, his calm, ashen-gray shield, enveloped him. He was a stone sinking through the water, unaffected by the pressure, his own density absolute. He walked through the open doors and into the gloom. The interior of the gym was a vast, cavernous space. The air was cold and sterile. The only light came from the glowing, geometric lines of a massive battlefield that covered the entire floor. In the dead center of the arena, seated upon a simple, throne-like chair of black metal, was Sabrina. She was smaller than her reputation suggested, a doll-like figure in a simple pink dress. Her hair was a severe, black bob, and her face was a placid, emotionless mask. Only her eyes, a piercing, luminous silver, were alive. They were fixed on him, and as he met her gaze, he felt a sudden, sharp, and brutally invasive presence in his mind. Less than you were trespassing. Greater than her voice was not sound. It was an intrusion, a telepathic spike driven directly into his consciousness. It was cold, imperious, and radiated a power that could shatter the sanity of a lesser man. Ash stopped at the edge of the battlefield, his expression unchanged. He did not flinch from the mental assault. Instead, he simply shielded. He didn't erect a wall. He didn't counterattack. He merely reinforced the natural calm of his own spirit. his gray aura turning the needle of her telepathy into a dull, harmless pressure. Less than your mental shields are, unusual, greater than she stated, a flicker of surprise rippling through her cold projection. Less than they are passive. Empty. Like the gray static of a dead channel. Why have you come here? I have no interest in challengers. Greater than. I'm not a challenger, Ash said, his actual voice startlingly warm in the cold, sterile room. My name is Ash Ketchum. Professor Oak sent me. We believe the spiritual disturbance across Kanto has its focal point here, in Saffron City. I'm here to help. Sabrina's lips curved into a slight, condescending smile. Less than help? A child comes to offer me help? I am the psychic master of Saffron. I am aware of the dissonance. I am containing it. You are merely another source of noise. Leave. Now. Greater than. The psychic pressure in the room tripled. It was a blunt, crushing force, meant to overwhelm and expel him. Ash stood his ground, the pressure washing around him like water around a stone. Prime floated forward slightly, the silver light in its core flaring once, gently absorbing the excess spiritual static that Sabrina's power was agitating. You're not containing it, Ash countered, his voice losing its warmth, replaced by a clinical precision that rivaled her own. You're amplifying it. Your psychic shield is designed to keep things out, but the pressure from the veil is coming from within, from another dimension. Your shield is acting like the skin of a drum, and every spiritual tremor is being magnified tenfold by your own power. You're not a master of this situation, Sabrina. You're its prisoner. For the first time, a genuine emotion broke through her control. A flash of pure, cold fury. The geometric lines on the floor glowed an angry crimson. Less than you know nothing of my power. Greater than before she could unleash the attack she was so clearly preparing. A piercing siren wailed through the gym. Red lights began to flash, casting the cavernous room in a hellish strobe effect. A synthesized voice, devoid of panic, echoed from hidden speakers. Warning. Containment field failure in Sector Gamma. Primary psychic buffer offline. Subject. Alakazam. Status. Uncontrolled. A massive tremor shook the entire building, a shockwave of pure psychic force that originated from miles away but was powerful enough to make the concrete groan. Sabrina shot to her feet, her placid mask finally shattering, replaced by a look of genuine alarm. The feedback from the event slammed into her, and she staggered, a hand flying to her temple as a pained gasp escaped her lips. Alakazam, she whispered, her voice a strained, human thing. He was maintaining the city-wide dampening field. And the feedback loop just broke him, Ash finished, his eyes already distant, his senses focused on the epicenter of the blast. He's lost. Drowning in the fear of a million minds. He looked at her, his amber eyes sharp and commanding. We need to go. Now. Before he brings the whole city down on our heads. The Sylph Company Plaza was a vision of chaos. At its center stood an Alakazam, but it was a twisted mockery of the usually serene and thoughtful species. Its body twitched with violent, uncontrolled spasms. Its eyes glowed with a terrifying, vacant light. A visible aura of psychic energy, distorted and corrupted with the sickly purple of spiritual taint, pulsed around it, warping the very air. With every pulse, reality buckled. A nearby delivery truck was compressed into a sphere of scrap metal. The glass on the surrounding skyscrapers cracked and spider-webbed. Pavement buckled and tore. The Alakazam wasn't attacking, it was screaming, and the world was breaking around it. Sabrina teleported them both to the edge of the plaza, her own form shimmering with a protective psychic barrier. She raised a hand, her face a mask of grim concentration. Alakazam. Return to me. Obey, she commanded, her telepathic voice a lance of pure will. Her command struck the maddened Pokémon, and for a moment, it faltered. But then the city's collective terror washed over it, mingling with the veil's static, and it shrieked in agony. It retaliated with a psychic blast of its own, a raw, unfocused wave of pure force. The blast slammed into Sabrina's shield, and she cried out, staggering back. The feedback was too much. Trying to fight this mind with her own was like trying to shout down a hurricane. Your method won't work. Ash's voice cut through her pain. He stood calmly beside her, his jacket whipping in the psychic winds, his expression one of absolute focus. Its mind is shattered. You can't command it. You can't reason with it. You have to give it an anchor. Sabrina stared at him, breathing heavily. And what is your solution, Ghost Whisperer? To talk it down? No, Ash said, a faint, confident smile touching his lips. To control the battlefield. To disrupt its concentration. And then, to offer it a moment of silence. Before she could question him, he acted. Shade. Phase 1. His Gengar shot forward, a blur of purple shadow. It didn't attack the Alakazam. Instead, it dove into the shadow of a buckled fountain. The shadow instantly darkened and spread, flowing across the plaza floor in intricate, impossible patterns. Where the Alakazam had been teleporting, its only defense a frantic, unpredictable relocation, it now found its exit points, occupied. It tried to phase out, but as its psychic energy touched a patch of the supernaturally charged shadow, it recoiled as if from an electric shock. Shade had laid a series of spiritual traps, turning the very ground into a hostile environment for psychic travel. The Alakazam was pinned. Prime. Phase 2. The ancestral Ghastly drifted into the open, its form seeming to waver and pulse. It opened its ethereal mouth and released a low, resonant hum. It was not a sound, but a wave of pure soporific energy. Hypnosis. Simultaneously, it unleashed a nightshade, not as a focused beam, but as a wide, disorienting cloud of ghostly apparitions that swirled around the Alakazam. The effect was immediate. The Alakazam's hyper-aware mind, already struggling with the psychic overload, was now being assaulted with conflicting data. The hypnosis wave was trying to lull its consciousness, while the nightshade was filling its vision with terrifying phantoms. Its concentration, the source of all its power, fractured. The psychic storm around it wavered, its power sputtering like a dying engine. Sabrina watched, her silver eyes wide with disbelief. He wasn't overpowering the Alakazam. He was outthinking it. He was using the chaotic, ethereal nature of his ghost types to impose a perfect, strategic order on the battlefield. Phase 3, Ash said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. He began to walk forward, stepping into the maelstrom. He moved with a steady, unhurried gait, his hands loose at his sides. The psychic turbulence buffeted him, but he walked through it as if it were a mild breeze. The Alakazam, its frantic eyes darting between the shadow traps and the swirling phantoms, finally focused on the approaching human. It gathered the last of its strength, its spoons glowing with malevolent energy for one final, desperate psychic attack. Ash didn't brace himself. He didn't summon a shield. He simply opened himself up. His ashen gray aura flared to life, not as a weapon, but as an offering. It was an aura of perfect, absolute calm. A void of emotion. A sanctuary of silence. He projected it forward, a gentle wave of utter peace that met the Alakazam's psychic scream. The two forces met, and there was no explosion. The Alakazam's attack, a concentrated blast of pain and fear, washed into Ash's aura and simply ceased to exist. It was absorbed, neutralized, and dissipated into nothingness. The maddened Pokémon had thrown the entirety of its torment at him, and he had accepted it without a word, without a flinch. The Alakazam froze, its spoons clattering to the pavement. The psychic storm around it died completely. It stared at Ash, its crazed eyes finding a single, stable point in a universe of chaos. It saw a human who did not fear it, did not command it, did not wish to harm it. It saw only peace. With a shuddering sigh, the great Pokémon's legs buckled, and it collapsed to the ground, unconscious, its mind finally at rest. The silence that fell over the plaza was no longer the oppressive, fearful silence of before. It was a true, clean quiet. The high-pitched whine that had plagued the city was gone. Ash stood over the fallen Alakazam for a moment before pulling a specialized, dark purple Pokeball from his belt and gently touching it to the Pokémon's head, absorbing it in a stream of calm energy. He turned. Sabrina was staring at him, her icy composure completely gone. Her face was a mixture of awe, confusion, and something else, something that looked unnervingly like hope. Her psychic shields were down, her mind open and vulnerable for the first time in years. The battle she had just witnessed had fundamentally broken her understanding of how power worked. He hadn't used more force. He had used a better kind of strength. He had weaponized tranquility. She found her voice, and when she spoke, it wasn't the cold, invasive telepathy of before. It was a quiet, fragile, human whisper that was barely carried on the wind. "What are you?" Ash walked toward her, his expression softening from the intensity of battle into one of weary understanding. "I'm the one who stands on the edge of the veil," he said, his voice calm and steady. "And it's thinning, Sabrina. What happened to your Alakazam is just the beginning. The pressure is building, and right now, you and your city are directly in the path of the storm." She looked at the devastation around them, then back at his face, at the ancient wisdom in his young eyes. For her entire life, she had been alone in her power, isolated by the very gift that made her strong. But now, standing before her was someone who walked in a world deeper and stranger than her own, and he did so not with fear or arrogance, but with a quiet, unshakable confidence. He wasn't just another source of noise. He was the only person who might be able to teach her the sound of silence. An alliance was no longer a question, it was a necessity. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3, The Hearthome Masquerade. The transition from Saffron to Hearthome was like stepping from a monochrome photograph into a world saturated with impossible color. Where Saffron had been a city muted by fear, its voice a psychic scream trapped behind a veneer of silence, Hearthome sang. The city was a symphony of life, a bustling, vibrant hub of art, fashion, and the unique, theatrical combat of Pokemon contests. The architecture was a whimsical blend of old-world Sinnoh stone and modern, sweeping lines of colorful steel, all of it designed not just for function, but for aesthetic delight. The air, crisp and clean, carried the scent of roasted poffins from street-side cafes and the faint, sweet perfume of the city's meticulously cultivated gardens. Ash arrived not as a somber guardian of the Vale, but as a carefully constructed enigma. His usual practical attire was gone, replaced by a suit of charcoal gray silk so dark it was nearly black. It was expertly tailored, moving with him as a second skin, its understated elegance a stark contrast to the flamboyant fashions of the Hearthome elite. He wore no tie, the top button of his crisp white shirt undone, lending him an air of casual, confident disregard for convention. The only hint of his true nature was the mask he'd chosen for the evening's event. It was a simple, polished piece of obsidian, shaped to cover the top half of his face, its smooth, unadorned surface evoking the serene, cyclopean visage of a Duskull. It was a subtle, dangerous joke that only he would understand. Tonight, he was not Ash Ketchum, the last of the Vale Guardians. He was Sylvan, a name he'd borrowed from an ancient text on arboreal spirits, a persona crafted for a single purpose: to meet an informant. The lead from Sabrina's recovered Alakazam had been cryptic, a fractured psychic image of a contest pass and the recurring sound of a Chatot mimicry. Professor Oak's network had decrypted it, tracing the pass to a high-strung but brilliant coordinator named Silas, a man who had apparently stumbled upon information regarding the organization behind the growing instability and had chosen the city's most public event, the annual Hearthome Masquerade, as the venue for a dead drop. It was a classic spy's gambit. Hide in the open, become a single face in a sea of masks. The Hearthome Grand Contest Hall was a breathtaking piece of architecture, its crystalline dome glittering against the twilight sky like a captured galaxy. Inside, the grand ballroom was a dizzying spectacle of opulence. A chandelier the size of a Snorlax, composed of thousands of shimmering crystals, cast a warm, golden light over the swirling kaleidoscope of guests below. The air hummed with the sophisticated strains of a string quartet playing a Baroque arrangement of the Sinnoh lead theme. The scents of expensive perfume, fine wine, and exotic hors d'oeuvres mingled into a heady perfume of wealth and influence. He moved through the crowd with a liquid grace, a predator in a room full of peacocks. His aura, usually attuned to the whispers of the dead, was now a finely tuned social instrument. He let the emotional currents of the room flow over him, tasting the sharp jealousy of a rival coordinator, the bubbly excitement of a debutante, the cool, calculating ambition of a league official. He was searching for a specific flavor, the sour, metallic tang of fear. He found it near a fountain sculpted in the image of a majestic melodic, its waters flowing with what looked like sparkling berry juice. A man in a tailored tuxedo with garish, glittering lapels and a full-head Chatot mask was fidgeting with his cufflinks, his nervous energy a frantic, discordant note in the room's symphony of feigned nonchalance. Silas. Ash's target. Before he could make his approach, a hush fell over the ballroom. The music swelled, and a path cleared on the grand marble staircase. All eyes turned to the woman who stood at its summit, and Ash understood why this city was the heart of the contest circuit. She was Fantina, the Hearthome gym leader and a living legend in the world of coordination. She was a tall, statuesque woman with a cascade of purple hair styled into an impossible, gravity-defying coif. Her gown was a masterpiece of shimmering, violet fabric that seemed woven from twilight itself, accented with patterns that mimicked the spectral flames of a chandelier. Her mask was a delicate, jewel-encrusted creation shaped like the wings of a butterfly, but it did nothing to hide the playful, intelligent fire in her eyes. She descended the stairs not by walking, but by flowing, her every movement a performance. Mes chéris. My beautiful friends. Her voice was a rich, melodic contralto, laced with a charming Colossian accent that made every word sound like a line from a romantic poem. Welcome. Welcome to a night of beauty, of passion, of mystery. Tonight, we celebrate the magnificent bond between trainer and Pokémon, the artistry that turns a simple battle into a ballet of brilliance. She reached the bottom of the stairs, her gaze sweeping across the adoring crowd. Then her eyes landed on Ash. For a fraction of a second, her practiced smile faltered, replaced by a spark of genuine curiosity. In a room where every guest was clamoring for her attention, here was one who stood apart, his posture relaxed, his masked gaze intense and analytical. He was not observing her as a celebrity, but as a fellow master of a craft, and she felt the subtle shift in the room's energy that his presence created. Her path seemed to change course, an almost subconscious magnetic pull drawing her toward this quiet anomaly in her perfectly orchestrated world. She stopped before him, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "Bonsoir, monsieur," she purred, her voice a low, intimate murmur. "It is a rare thing, to see a ghost at my party who is not one of my own. I do not recognize the cut of your suit, nor the silence of your soul. You are not from Sinnoh, I think?" "Is it that obvious?" Ash replied, his voice a low, smooth baritone, the persona of Sylvan, settling over him comfortably. "I find your Sinnoh celebrations to be a welcome change of pace. The passion is much more overt here." Fantina's eyes lit up. "Overt? Oui, passion should not be a thing to be hidden. It is the fire that fuels all great art. And you, monsieur, you have the look of an artist. A connoisseur of the shadows, perhaps?" she asked, her gaze lingering on his Duskull-inspired mask. "I appreciate the form in all its expressions," Ash said, his words deliberately vague, from the most brilliant flame to the most elegant shadow. A slow, delighted smile spread across her lips. "A poet, in a city of performers. You must tell me your name." "Sylvan," Ash offered smoothly. "And it is an honor, Gym Leader Fantina. Your work with Drifblim at the Wallace Cup last year was revolutionary. The choreography of the ominous wind was transcendent." He had done his research. The compliment was specific, accurate, and it landed with the precision of a master strategist. Fantina's smile widened, a genuine warmth now shining in her eyes. It was one thing to be praised, it was another to be understood. "You have a good eye, Sylvan," she said, her voice dropping a little lower. "A very good eye indeed. I hope you will enjoy the evening's main event. We are having a small, informal exhibition. A chance for our brightest talents to display their passion." Her gaze was a direct challenge, an invitation. Before Ash could respond, she gave him a small, conspiratorial wink and allowed herself to be swept away by a gaggle of fawning reporters. Ash watched her go, a flicker of genuine admiration in his eyes. She was a performer, through and through, but beneath the theatrics was a will of solid iron and a mind as sharp as a shard of glass. He turned his attention back to his mission. He approached the fountain, his movements casual, as if he were simply seeking a drink. He stood beside Silas, the man in the Chatot mask, and spoke without looking at him. "The Chatot in Viridian Forest sings a lonely song," Ash murmured, the code phrase feeling ridiculous on his tongue. Silas practically jumped out of his skin, his fear now a nauseating, acrid spike in the air. He fumbled with a glass of juice, nearly spilling it down his front. "It's supposed to," he stammered, his voice muffled by the mask. "It's a solo artist." "I was told you had a ticket for me," Ash said, his voice low and steadying, "for a new kind of performance." "The ticket is not cheap," Silas whispered, his head darting around nervously. "The people I overheard. They are not the kind of producers you want to disappoint. They are ruthless. I need to know I'm giving the information to someone who can handle it. Someone who understands that power isn't just about brute force. It's about control, it's about style." He was parroting the contest philosophy, his fear making him cling to the only world he understood. "So you need a demonstration," Ash surmised. "The exhibition," Silas hissed. "Fantina just announced it. Show me. Show me something they won't see coming. Something that proves you can move in the shadows. Do that, and the information is yours." Before Ash could agree, Silas scurried away, melting back into the crowd. Ash sighed. It was an unnecessary complication, but a theatrical challenge was a language this city understood, and if he was being honest with himself, a small, competitive part of him relished the opportunity. An hour later, Fantina took to the stage at the far end of the ballroom. A temporary contest field had been set up, its surface gleaming. "And now, mise-en-scène, for a little impromptu sparkle," she announced, her voice booming through a hidden sound system. "A few of our guests will demonstrate the spirit of Hearthome. But first, a newcomer has requested a chance to grace our stage. A mysterious artist from a distant land known only as Sylvan." A ripple of intrigued murmurs went through the crowd. Ash strode toward the stage, the spotlight finding him, bathing him in a circle of white light. He felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on him, critical, curious, and in Fantina's case, intensely interested. He walked to the trainer's box, his movements deliberate and calm. He reached to his belt, to a pokeball that was as dark and polished as his mask. "In the dance of light and shadow," he said, his voice resonating through the hall, calm and clear, "true beauty is often found in the mystery that lies between. Mismagius, take the stage." He tossed the pokeball in a gentle arc. It opened not with a flash of red light, but with a swirl of purple mist from which his Mismagius emerged. She was a magnificent specimen, her spectral form sharp and defined, the 3 red spheres on her body glowing with a soft, internal light. She wore no silly accessories, no ribbons or bows. Her elegance was inherent, her power a quiet, confident hum in the air. She floated to the center of the stage and bowed her head, a gesture of regal grace that immediately captivated the audience. "Mismagius," Ash commanded, his voice a low murmur that somehow carried perfectly. "Let us begin, mystical fire." Mismagius's eyes glowed, and she began to spin. From the tips of her ethereal form, she released not a stream of fire, but a series of delicate, purple fireballs. They did not shoot out, but instead began to orbit her like tiny, captive stars, bathing the stage in a warm, enchanting violet light. The crowd gasped at the control, the sheer beauty of the display. "Now, phantom force." With a flick of her head, Mismagius vanished. The orbiting flames, however, remained, continuing their silent, hypnotic dance in the center of the stage. The audience held its breath. Where had she gone? A second passed. 2. Then, from the very center of the orbiting flames, Mismagius reappeared, her form shimmering as if she were a mirage. And for the finale, Shadow Ball. This was the masterstroke. Mismagius gathered dark energy, but she didn't form it into a single, crude orb. Instead, she broke it apart, shaping it into a dozen smaller spheres of perfect, polished darkness. With another graceful spin, she sent them flying outwards. They didn't explode. They moved with impossible precision, weaving between the orbiting embers of mystical fire, the 2 opposing forces, light and dark, fire and shadow, creating a breathtaking, 3-dimensional tapestry of moving energy. It was a living constellation, a ballet of spectral power and elemental grace. The orbs of shadow and fire danced in perfect harmony for a final, stunning moment before Mismagius brought them all spiraling back to her, absorbing them into her form with a final, brilliant flash of purple and black that left the audience in stunned, absolute silence. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, the entire ballroom erupted in thunderous applause. Ash saw Silas, his Chatot mask bobbing up and down in frantic, amazed agreement. But his eyes were drawn to Fantina, who stood at the side of the stage. She wasn't clapping. She was staring, her lips slightly parted, her eyes shining with an emotion that went far beyond professional appreciation. It was a look of profound, artistic revelation. She had just witnessed someone command a ghost, a creature of chaos and fear, and turn its power into something of sublime, heartbreaking beauty. Ash gave a slight bow, and Mismagius mirrored the gesture before returning to her pokeball in another swirl of mist. As he stepped off the stage, the crowd parted for him, their expressions a mixture of awe and respect. He ignored them, his focus singular. He needed to find Silas. He scanned the room, his aura flaring. He felt Silas's nervous energy, but it was tainted now. Beneath the anxiety was a new, sharp spike of raw terror. And it was moving. Fast, away from the ballroom. Ash's demeanor shifted in an instant. The charming artist vanished, replaced by the cold, efficient guardian. He spotted him. Silas was being hustled through a service exit by two large men in identical black suits and blank, hexagonal combi masks. The Gilded Hand. Without a word, Ash followed. He didn't run. He moved with a silent, predatory purpose, slipping through a side door and into the stark, utilitarian corridors of the backstage area. The sounds of the party faded, replaced by the hum of ventilation systems and the distant clatter of the kitchens. "Shade," Ash whispered, his own Gengar phasing into existence from the shadows on the wall. "They're heading for the loading docks. Go ahead. Don't engage. Just redecorate." Shade's grin was a slash of white in the dim light. It sank into the floor and was gone. Ash followed the echoes of fear and malice down a long, concrete hallway. He heard a scuffle from around the next corner. "The information. Where is it?" a gruff voice demanded. "I don't have it," Silas squeaked. "I swear." Ash rounded the corner just as one of the thugs in the combi mask slammed Silas against the wall. The other was holding a small, wicked-looking knife. But they froze. The loading dock they had been heading for was no longer accessible. The wide, rolling metal door was there, but the shadow it cast on the floor was now a churning, semi-solid pit of absolute darkness. From its depths, a pair of glowing red eyes stared up at them, and a low, guttural chuckle echoed in the hallway, seeming to come from every shadow at once. "What the hell is that?" the thug with the knife whispered, taking an involuntary step back. "That," Ash's voice was calm and cold from behind them, "is the new interior decorator." They spun around. Ash stood there, his duskull mask now looking impossibly menacing in the harsh fluorescent light. Before they could react, he moved. He was a blur of controlled motion, his movements precise and economical. He disarmed the knife-wielding thug with a sharp strike to the wrist, sending the blade skittering across the floor. He sidestepped the other's clumsy punch, using the man's momentum to guide him face first into the wall with a sickening crunch. The first thug recovered and lunged, but Shade's spectral hand erupted from the floor and grabbed his ankle, sending him sprawling. Within 5 seconds, both men were groaning on the floor, incapacitated. Ash walked over to the terrified Silas, who was slumped against the wall, hyperventilating. He helped him to his feet. "I believe you have a ticket for me," Ash said, his voice back to its calm, steady tone. Silas, trembling, reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, encrypted data chip. "The Gilded Hand," he stammered, thrusting it at Ash. "That's what they call themselves. They're fanatics. They believe the veil is a cage, and that the legendary, the original Spectre, is the key to unlocking it. They've been setting up energy siphons in places of high spiritual resonance. There's a major operation in a bayou, south of Hoenn. A place the locals call the Whispering Fen." Ash took the chip, his mind already racing. The original Spectre. A name from the darkest, most forbidden legends of the ghost world. "Thank you, Silas. Now get out of here. Lose yourself in the party. You were never here." Silas nodded frantically and scurried away, back toward the light and noise of the ballroom. Ash watched him go, then turned his attention to the unconscious thugs. He would leave them for the local authorities. He returned to the party just as the orchestra was playing its final waltz. The crowd was beginning to thin. He saw Fantina near the grand staircase, bidding her final guests farewell. She saw him approaching, and a knowing, intrigued smile played on her lips. She noted his slightly ruffled hair and the almost imperceptible tension in his shoulders. "Ah, the mysterious Sylvan returns," she said, her voice a low, playful drawl. "You disappeared so quickly after your magnifique performance. I trust you were not getting into any trouble?" "Just admiring the architecture," Ash replied smoothly. "It's a truly remarkable building." "Indeed it is," she said, her eyes sparkling. She knew he was lying, and she was utterly fascinated by it. He was a man of stunning artistry and dangerous secrets. It was an intoxicating combination. "Hearthome City will not forget your performance tonight, Sylvan. And neither will I expect we shall see each other again. An artist of your caliber cannot stay in the shadows for long, no matter how elegant they may be." "I'll count on it, gym leader," Ash said with a small, genuine smile. He turned and walked away, melting into the last of the departing crowd, the data chip a cold, hard reality in his pocket. He had a new name for his enemy, and a new destination. The Whispering Fen. The masquerade was over. The hunt was on. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Whispers of the Bayou. The air in the Whispering Fen was not air. It was a thick, wet blanket, heavy with the smells of sweet decay and the fecund, unrestrained explosion of life. It clung to the skin, beaded on the eyelashes, and filled the lungs with the taste of damp earth, rotting cypress wood, and 1,000 years of accumulated secrets. This was a place that had drowned and been reborn 1,000,000 times, a primordial soup of life and death where the veil was not merely thin. It was frayed, tattered, and worn through in places like old lace. Ash moved through this world in a flat-bottomed skiff, the small, silent electric motor barely disturbing the slick, black surface of the water. The bayou was a labyrinth of murky waterways, its paths dictated by the gnarled, serpentine roots of massive cypress trees. Their skeletal branches, draped in veils of Spanish moss that swayed like the gray hair of drowned ghosts, formed a dense canopy that blotted out the sun, plunging the world below into a perpetual, emerald-green twilight. The only sounds were the rhythmic thrum of 1,000,000,000 insects, the sudden, guttural croak of a hidden politoad, and the soft, constant whisper that gave the fen its name, a sound that was not wind, but the collective, sighing exhalation of countless minor spirits tethered to the ancient trees. He had been following the Gilded Hand's energy trail for 3 days, the journey taking him south from Sinnoh, across a sliver of ocean, to this remote, uncharted swampland that sat on the edge of Hoenn's known geography. His senses, honed to the subtle frequencies of the spirit world, were on high alert. The whispers here were not the tormented shrieks of Saffron's feedback loop. They were wild, untamed chorus. The spiritual energy was dense, chaotic, and powerful. It was a place of immense natural magic, and the Gilded Hand's technological siphon was a festering, cancerous wound upon it. He could feel it miles before he saw any sign of civilization. A dissonant, synthetic hum grinding against the organic harmony of the fen, a note of pure wrongness. His destination was a small, isolated community marked on no maps, a village called Mire Deep. According to the fragmented data Silas had provided, the Gilded Hand was using the village as a base of operations, their presence masked by local superstition and the region's natural inaccessibility. As the waterway widened into a small, muddy lake, Ash saw the first signs of it, a cluster of dilapidated stilt houses, built from weathered, unpainted cypress wood, connected by a network of rickety-looking rope bridges. Smoke curled lazily from a few clay chimneys, the only sign of life. He moored his skiff to a half-submerged post and stepped onto the main dock, his boots sinking slightly into the damp, spongy wood. The moment he set foot in the village, the whispers stopped. The insect noise seemed to die down. He felt a dozen pairs of eyes on him from the shadowy doorways and shuttered windows of the stilt houses. The air, already thick, became heavy with suspicion and a deep, ingrained fear. These people were not just isolated, they were terrified. An old man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles and his back bent like a cypress root, emerged from the largest of the houses. He held a long, gnarled staff topped with a carved crocodile skull. He was flanked by 2 younger, sturdier men armed with crude spears. "We don't take kindly to strangers," the old man said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "The fen is angry. The Gloomfang walks. This is no place for off-worlders." Gloomfang. A local name, likely for the creature the Gilded Hand was hunting. "My name is Ash. I'm not here to cause trouble," he said, his voice calm, his hands kept in plain sight, away from the pokeballs on his belt. "I'm tracking a group of people who are poisoning this land. They wear masks, and use technology that hurts the spirits of this place." The old man's eyes, cloudy with cataracts, sharpened with a flicker of interest, but the fear remained dominant. "You speak of the spirits? You're one of them, then? A hexer?" The word was an accusation, a slur. "I am a friend to the spirits, yes," Ash replied, choosing his words carefully. "And the men you're allowing to stay here are their enemies. They're the reason the fen is angry. They're the reason this Gloomfang is lashing out. The outsiders pay well," one of the younger men grunted. "They keep to themselves. It's the witch girl who's stirring the spirits. Her and her unnatural ways. She's the one who called the Gloomfang down on us." The witch girl. This had to be the key. "I'd like to speak with her," Ash said. The old man spat a stream of brown liquid into the murky water. "Speak with the cursed, and you'll be cursed yourself. Luna lives on the edge of the swamp, where the black water meets the deadwood. Been that way since her powers manifested. Go, if you want. But when the Gloomfang takes you, don't expect us to come looking for your bones." He turned and shuffled back into his hut, the other men giving Ash one last hostile glare before following. The message was clear. He was on his own. Ash followed a barely there path of flattened reeds and decaying planks that led away from the village. The oppressive atmosphere of the fen deepened here. The trees were older, their forms more twisted and monstrous. The whispers were louder, more agitated, filled with a palpable sense of pain. He felt a focal point of this pain nearby, a concentration of uncontrolled, empathic power. It was like a psychic wound, bleeding its sorrow into the environment. He found the shack at the heart of it. It was a tiny, ramshackle thing, barely more than a lean-to, but it was cared for. Strange, intricate charms woven from reeds, feathers, and small animal bones hung from the eaves, twisting in the slight breeze. A small, well-tended garden of phosphorescent mosses cast a soft, ethereal glow on the porch. This was not the home of a monster. It was the sanctuary of a pariah. He stepped onto the porch, and the front door creaked open before he could knock. A young woman stood there, silhouetted against the dim light within. She was small and slight, wrapped in a patchwork shawl of muted greens and browns that made her seem like a part of the swamp itself. Her hair was a wild, tangled mane of dark, midnight blue, and her eyes, wide and luminous in the gloom, were the color of amethysts. And they were filled with a profound, soul-deep terror. "Go away," she whispered, her voice barely a breath of sound. It was shaky, fragile. "You're too loud." Ash stopped. He immediately understood. It wasn't his voice she was talking about. It was his aura. To her untrained, hypersensitive empathy, his very presence, the controlled power of his spirit and the ancient beings that accompanied him, must feel like a shout in a library. He consciously dampened his aura, pulling it in, shielding it until it was no more than a faint, quiet ember. He saw her flinch less, her shoulders untensing a fraction of an inch. Around her, a few of the hanging charms stopped vibrating. "My name is Ash," he said, his voice soft. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be loud. Is it better now?" She stared at him, her head tilted like a frightened bird. She had never met anyone who could turn down the volume of their soul. "A little," she conceded, her voice still a whisper. "Why are you here? The others, the ones with the metal boxes, they don't come here. They're afraid." "I'm not with them," Ash said gently. "I'm here to stop them. I was told you might know something about the creature they're hunting. The Gloomfang." At the name, a wave of pure, undiluted pain washed over him. It wasn't an attack. It was an emotional leak. It emanated from her, a psychic sob of another being's agony. A clay pot on her windowsill cracked, a thin line splitting its side. It hurts," she stammered, a hand coming up to her own chest as if feeling a phantom wound. "They hunt it. They burn it with their loud, angry lights. It's scared. It doesn't mean to break things. It's just trying to make them stop." Here was the heart of the matter. This girl, Luna, was not a hexer stirring up trouble. She was an empath, bonded to the very creature the Gilded Hand was tormenting. Her curse was that she felt its pain as her own. "Can you talk to it?" Ash asked, taking another slow, non-threatening step forward. "Not with words," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the floorboards. "Only feelings. Pictures. It shows me teeth. Metal teeth. And a cage of red light. It's so scared of the red light. Energy containment fields. Lost cages. The Gilded Hand was trying to capture it alive." Suddenly, a deafening roar tore through the bayou. It was a sound of immense pain and fury, a bass-heavy cry that shook the very stilts of Luna's shack. It was followed by the high-tech, inorganic shriek of discharging energy. Luna cried out, collapsing to her knees, clutching her head. "They found it," she gasped, tears streaming down her face. "They're hurting it." The wave of agony that rolled through the fen was immense. Ash braced himself against it, his own disciplined mind filtering the raw emotion. "Where?" he demanded, his voice sharp but not unkind. "The old cypress," she sobbed, pointing a trembling finger west. "The one they call the Hanging Father." Ash didn't hesitate. Prime, stay with her, he commanded, the thought a flash of intent. The ancestral Ghastly materialized from his shadow, its calm, silvery presence a soothing balm against Luna's psychic turmoil. Shade, with me. We're going dark. His Gengar gave a wicked grin and melted into his shadow as Ash sprinted off the porch and into the swamp, his movements swift and silent. He vaulted over cypress roots and slid through muddy clearings, his senses locked onto the sounds of the struggle. He arrived at the edge of a large, stagnant pool. In its center grew a truly colossal cypress tree, the Hanging Father, its branches so wide and heavy they dipped back into the water. And at its base, cornered, was the Gloomfang. It was no monster. It was a magnificent, terrifyingly beautiful creature. It had the basic form of a Zoroark, but it was no illusion. Its fur was the color of charcoal and ash, and a mane of tangible, spectral mist swirled around its neck and shoulders. Its claws were not keratin, but polished obsidian, and its eyes burned with a soft, blue ghost light. It was a regional variant, a true ghost, dark type, a spirit of the swamp made flesh. And it was wounded. A deep gash on its flank leaked not blood, but a slow, smoky ectoplasm. Surrounding it were 5 Gilded Hand operatives. They were clad in advanced, environment-sealed armor and combi masks. They held high-tech rifles that weren't firing projectiles, but thick, ruby-red beams of energy that formed a crackling cage around the Gloomfang. The creature swiped at the beams, only to recoil with a roar of pain. Hold it steady. The leader barked, his voice tinny through his Mosk speaker. The siphons are almost at full charge. Corporate wants this specimen alive. Ash's eyes narrowed, his strategic mind dissecting the scene in a fraction of a second. 5 targets. Advanced tech. Hostile environment. He smiled. This was his element. He slipped into the murky water, creating barely a ripple. He submerged himself, his aura shielding him from the leeches and other, less savory things that lived in the muck. He swam underwater, a dark shape moving through the black water, coming up behind a cypress root on the far side of the Gilded Hand's perimeter. Less than shade, the rifles, greater than he projected. Less than they're networked. Disable the leaders first. Create a cascade failure, greater than. Shade detached from his shadow, now a free-floating entity of pure, malevolent darkness. It sank into the swamp, becoming one with the murky water and the shadows of the tree roots. It moved with impossible stealth toward the leader, who was busy barking orders, his attention focused on the captured creature. Ash took a pokeball from his belt. It was made of a pale, petrified wood. Trevenant. The field is yours. He released the Pokemon beneath the water. The ancient, haunted tree spirit emerged silently, only the top of its horn-like branches breaking the surface, looking like any other piece of deadwood in the swamp. Now, Ash whispered. Shade's shadowy arm erupted from the water behind the Gilded Hand leader and plunged into the energy rifle. There was no sound, but the high-tech weapon sparked violently and its red beam died. A cascade of error messages flashed across the visors of the other 4 operatives as their own weapons sputtered. The network was down. At the same instant, Trevenant rose from the water to its full, intimidating height. It slammed its powerful root like claws into the mud, and a wave of ghostly green energy pulsed outwards. Grassy terrain. The swamp floor exploded with life. Thick, supernatural vines and glowing mosses erupted from the mud, tangling the operatives' feet, holding them fast. The Gloomfang, freed from the energy cage, seized its chance. With a vengeful roar, it lunged at the nearest trapped operative, its obsidian claws ready to tear through his armor. No, Ash's voice cut through the chaos, a sharp, absolute command that stopped even the enraged creature in its tracks. They are not to be killed, only disarmed. The Gloomfang turned its head, its burning blue eyes locking with Ash's calm amber gaze. It saw no fear, no avarice. It saw an alpha, a being of immense, controlled power who commanded the very shadows and trees. It hesitated, then gave a low, rumbling growl of assent, and backed away. The operatives, struggling against the vines, tried to draw sidearms. They were too slow. Shade, now a terrifyingly fast phantom, zipped between them, its spectral hands phasing through their armor to touch the power packs of their suits, shorting them out with a touch of ghost energy. Within seconds, all 5 were powerless, tangled, and helpless. Ash strode out of the water, dripping mud and swamp filth, looking every bit the part of a vengeful nature spirit. Trevenant stood behind him like a loyal sentinel, and shade floated at his shoulder, its grin wider than ever. The Gloomfang watched him, its initial rage replaced by a wary, profound respect. Suddenly, a small, shaky voice called out from the edge of the clearing. It's okay now. He made the loud men stop. Luna stood there, with Prime floating protectively beside her. She was looking not at Ash, but at the Gloomfang, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. For the first time, she wasn't just feeling its pain. She was projecting her own calm, her own relief. Guided by the gentle, stabilizing presence of Ash's ancestral Ghastly, she had taken her first real step toward controlling her gift. The great creature's posture softened. It took a hesitant step toward her, then another. It stopped a few feet away and lowered its head, nudging her gently with its misty mane. A silent, emotional conversation passed between them, a torrent of gratitude, comfort, and a shared sense of belonging. Ash watched them, a faint, genuine smile on his face. He had come here to hunt the Gilded Hand, but he had found something more. A unique spirit, a unique human, and a bond as wild and deep as the bayou itself. He knelt by one of the disabled operatives, pulling the energy siphon from his belt. It was more advanced than he'd feared, its crystalline matrix already humming with a fraction of the Fen's immense power. And etched onto its side was a small, almost invisible cartouche. It was an ancient Alalon symbol, a stylized representation of a royal tomb. His next destination was clear, but for the first time, he considered that he might not have to go there alone. He looked at Luna, who was now stroking the Gloomfang's head, her face luminous with a tearful, newfound joy. He had come to save the Fen from her, but in the end, it was she who was its true guardian. He would offer her a choice. To stay here, as the protector of this place, or to come with him, and learn to turn the curse that had isolated her into a gift that could help save the world. Chapter 4 End.